Hello, welcome to the broadcast. My name's Dav. I'm just hoping to do a brief broadcast specifically to Australians today. Let's be less racist, Australia. It takes joint effort. It takes a critical mass of people to recognise that now is as good a time as any to do the work, to look at our history and to look at our present. So the story I have up here is a West Australian woman reporting that her son was on a sporting team where the coach refused to shake his hand or congratulate him or even acknowledge his presence. He was the only Aboriginal kid on the team, and he was marked different in the way he was in the way he was treated. I was distracted by this comment, which was said, how about let's not be at all racist? Yes, but this is a broadcast for Australians. Today, Facebook is also removing posts that are trying to educate Australians about our history of slavery. So when someone posted this picture, Facebook removed it and restricted the account for posting nudity. Facebook reinstated the photo and then apologised for the error after the Guardian newspaper inquired about it. But now Facebook is stopping people from sharing the story, including the journalist who wrote it, because of the picture that is the lead picture of the story, which is a picture of Aboriginal men in chains, because Australia had slavery. This is Aboriginal men chained up by the neck. We had various systems of profiting from the unpaid labour of people who were treated brutally. Their humanity was disrespected, and it's time for Australians to talk about that and think about that, regardless of Facebook trying to repress the discussion. So Facebook often pretends to be trying to be a neutral arbiter who stands back as much as possible. But when they remove photos of historical pictures depicting Australian slavery, even though the Australian Prime Minister has falsely told the public that Australian slavery wasn't a thing, didn't exist, we need to confront those truths because they influence and shape our present, and they continue to influence and shape our future. But don't underestimate our power. If we make that effort to overcome our own awkwardness, our own laziness in confronting what is part of our history and part of our present, then we can do so much to reduce the disrespect experienced by people who are Aboriginal, who are South Sea Islander, etc. in Australia. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the consequences of this lack of respect. I've covered yesterday the fact that Australians may not know that blackbirding was a practice of kidnapping or extorting or forcibly compelling or just deceiving thousands of men from the South Sea Islands, such as Vanuatu, Fiji, Tuvalu, etc., to come to Australia, be paid or promised the payment of minimal wages in order to avoid the label of slavery. But these people were kept in very restrictive conditions, and the labour conditions were essentially slavery, long hours of work, corporal punishment for any transgressions, etc. Now, that practice was challenged in 1901 when Australia decided to deport the surviving South Sea Islanders who had been brought to Australia and made to work in slave-like conditions and made to sign contracts in a language that they couldn't read and didn't understand. And the small, tiny wages they were promised, £5 a year, ended up being withheld by the government for safekeeping. And the Queensland government that did that, later gave those wages to the federal government of Australia to pay for the forcible deportation of the blackbirding enslaved men. So it is really important for us to do that work to be less racist now. I'll show you some statistics taken from linguistic analysis of body cameras in the United States, indicating that white people stopped by police officers are spoken to with inclusions that express gratitude or apologies. Basically, deferential words that acknowledge the humanity of the person who's been stopped by police, to help ease the transaction, to help maintain a social contract, to show mutual acknowledgement of respect. Sorry for stopping you. Thanks for handing over your ID, using last names and formal titles. Sir, madam, could you please do this? Now, this is a statistical analysis, so more common in black stops versus things that are more common in white stops. So reassurance, common in white stops, not at all common, not even registering on the scale for stops of Black American citizens. Now, who amongst us would think that things are any different in Australia, where we have a history of justifying and rationalising to ourselves the poor treatment of Aboriginals and the poor treatment of people from other backgrounds that have dark skin also. So we've allowed ourselves to profit off the enslavement of South Sea Islanders. We've profited off the enslavement of Aboriginal people. And then we continue to justify that to ourselves by saying, well, there are higher rates of crime. When I say we, I'm speaking broadly, but it's still a critical mass of racism in Australia that's tolerated. So even if we're not being actively racist, if we're not doing the work to reform that system, to reimagine how police interactions could be more respectful, not just through a training program, but through community insistence, we want police officers to show more respect for Aboriginal people. We want police officers to understand that there's a history of persecution to be overcome. That even if an Aboriginal person isn't showing deference, that it is our job to begin reconciliation. It is our job as the people who have benefited from the profitability of enslaving human beings. Oh, Sheldon said that they'll listen in the US as well. That's excellent, because Australia's international reputation is influenced by people's understanding. And if you understand that our current Prime Minister is still lying to the public about the existence of slavery in Australia, then we can interact at least on a more truthful basis. So I hope I do have some Australian listeners today. I hope that people understand that there's a continuum of respect, and that respect can have origins in the community as well as a culture sustained in the police force itself. If we are more demanding of respectful behaviour from police officers, then police officers are also more likely to respect the very existence and the physical safety of Black lives in Australia. Now, there was a recent incident where an Australian police officer pushed an Aboriginal teenager for being verbally disrespectful. And George Floyd's death in the United States, George Floyd's captured on camera torture and murder, helped a lot of people go, do you know what? We don't need a perfect victim. We don't need someone who's never committed a crime to feel sorry for. That injustice was so vivid, so blatant, so in front of our eyes, so undeniable, that we abandoned some of that false pattern of excuse making or excuse accepting. It became no longer acceptable to say, oh, but he was a criminal. No criminal deserves to be publicly executed in that fashion in 2020. They never did deserve it, but there are enough people now with ideas that understand that civilization lifts everybody, that if you have a subset of people who you don't accept deserve civilized standards, then it's not okay, and everybody is diminished by that. I've just seen footage of some people protesting by a Christopher Columbus statue. They want to protect it. They're there with bats and weapons. And I can show you that footage, actually. They assaulted a reporter and slashed the tires on his bike and slapped him and pushed him. And they were doing that even as he told them, do you know Christopher Columbus cut off people's hands for not finding him enough gold? Christopher Columbus also sex trafficked young girls. They didn't know that, but they defended it. Somebody called out they were savages. And that's the age-old justification for abusing people, abusing different groups of people. And we need to recognize that rationalization, that justification is still poisoning people's thinking now. I can use a less emotive word than poisoning. I can say it's still influencing people. So that sounds more objective, and it's up to us to decide, do we want those ideas to remain unchallenged? Do we want to passively accept the fact that a lot of those ideas permeate the thinking of people in law enforcement, who want to think to themselves that they are stamping out savagery, that they are keeping people in their rightful place if they react aggressively to children or even adults who say rude things to police? Do they deserve to be thrown to the pavement, have their teeth broken because their hands are behind their back and they can't protect themselves? Okay. I'm trying to find the article in which an Australian police officer very recently, maybe if I put, it's because I'm using Bing, isn't it? Bing is a terrible search engine. I must use Google. Bing is not helping me find the article on the racist activity that I need to find. Australian police officer pushes Aboriginal king. There we go. Now we have it. Share screen. Okay, so a New South Wales police officer was placed on restricted duties. This is from the 2nd of June. It showed the officer tripping an Indigenous teenager while arresting him, slamming the boy face first onto bricks. So it's not just the incident here that's distressing, it's the fact that the Federal Chief Commissioner, Mick Fuller, said that young man, the police officer, was just having a bad day. He justified this man's actions in taking a teenager whose hands were already cuffed behind his back and using his feet to purposefully kick out the teenager's legs from under him so that he fell face first onto a paved footpath, paved with bricks. His whimpering and his screams of pain are distressing, so that's my trigger warning for you to block your ears if you don't want to hear this.
Yeah. Maybe one dot. Anywhere, it doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter where you're from.
She swore, so what? If you got your police, you shouldn't be swearing at all.
It's in America.
I didn't say that at all, mate. Yes, you need to open up your ears.
What? I heard you from over here. I don't need to open up my ears.
Yeah, you do.
No.
You did not say that.
I'll crack you a fucking door, bro. What was that?
What was that? Turn around if I can see that camera.
What? Oi! What the fuck? You just slammed him on his face. Oi!
What the fuck is this? What the fuck is this? What?
He's in pain, bro. I've never heard that.
Slap him on the fucking face.
Okay. So not only did that happen, but that was defended by the police commissioner. And that's part of a pattern of behaviour. So that's all today for my broadcast on Let's Be Less Racist Australia. It's time. Thank you and goodbye for today. Oops. End broadcast.